My name is Elsa. I married my husband Kevin 15 years ago. We worked at the same company where Kevin was an office employee and I was the receptionist. When we got married, we moved into Kevin's family home. His dad, Harry, and mom, Susan, were so kind. There was none of the harassment people warned us about. Life was happy every single day. 4 years into our marriage, I became pregnant with Kevin's child. But around the time I entered the stable period of my pregnancy, Kevin began feeling unwell more frequently. Concerned, I suggested, maybe you should see a doctor. But Kevin brushed it off as mere tiredness, thinking some rest would do, and continued to work without taking any days off. However, Kevin rapidly lost weight, and recently he started to complain about body pain, so I insisted and took him to a major hospital. The diagnosis was pancreatic cancer. Many people know that by the time pancreatic cancer is found, it's often too late, and that was the case with Kevin. Pancreatic cancer often has few noticeable symptoms in its early stages, and it's not until the disease progresses that symptoms like body pain and loss of appetite begin to appear. Looking back, Kevin's recent condition matched almost exactly with those symptoms. As a result, Kevin was immediately hospitalized and underwent chemotherapy, but the cancer had already metastasized to various parts of his body, so surgery was not an option. The chemotherapy didn't have much effect, and ultimately, at Kevin's decision, he moved to palliative care. Kevin continued to lose weight. There I was, pregnant, my belly growing day by day while Kevin became thinner, his cheekbones prominent when he smiled. Still, I visited Kevin every day. I wanted to spend as much time as possible with Kevin and our baby on the way. Every day, every hour, every second mattered. Then, a few months later, our son was born without complications. Kevin, confined to his bed, was able to hold our child. When Kevin held our son, he shed tears of joy, and not just him, but everyone present, me and the in-laws, couldn't help but cry too. "I'm so glad to be alive." Kevin's words as he embraced our son are etched in my memory. About 3 weeks after that precious moment, Kevin passed away. I had braced myself, yet it was still shocking how quickly he was gone. With a newborn in my arms, I wondered how I would manage. But I didn't have much time to dwell on these thoughts, as my son was a whirlwind of crying, laughing, and growing as much as he could. As a mother, I knew I had to raise him right. After Kevin's funeral, I sat down with my in-laws for a serious talk. "Harry, Susan, I can't thank you enough for everything. Could I possibly stay here until I'm ready to go back to work?" I asked, and they looked at me with surprise. Harry and Susan exchanged glances, and then Harry spoke up. "Elsa, neither my wife nor I have ever thought of asking you to leave. You're our daughter too. Thank you for giving us such a precious grandchild. If it's all right with you, would you consider staying here with us permanently?" Their unexpected offer brought tears to my eyes. The tears fell on my son's cheek, and I was once again struck by the reality that he was mine and Kevin's child. As I cried, Susan came over and gently rubbed my back. "Elsa, you don't have to do this alone." Hearing those words, I was overwhelmed with tears once again. I realized anew that my beloved Kevin was raised by such a good man. That's why he was such a wonderful person. About a year later, our son started to walk, and his cuteness was more polished than ever. Suddenly, sister-in-law and her husband returned to the in-laws' house. This was the first time meeting my sister-in-law, Pip. As I had heard from Kevin before, Pip was quite the troublemaker, and apparently A few years before we got married, she had taken off with Harry's money. Of course, since Pip left, the in-laws had not been in touch with her, so not only me but even the in-laws had no idea that Pip was married. Moreover, Pip and her husband Aaron had been running a company together, which had gone bankrupt. They were broke and homeless, claiming it would be impossible to carry on with their lives from tomorrow. I admit I was wrong in the past, and I apologize. So please, let us stay here for a while. With those words, Pip apologized deeply at the doorway. Though she's been a troublemaker for the in-laws, she's still their real daughter after all. The in-laws just couldn't turn away their troubled daughter and reluctantly allowed her to stay, with the condition until she finds the next job. But this was the beginning of everything. The moment the in-laws allowed Pip to stay, she began to do as she pleased and started calling me a freeloader. Pip's husband, my brother-in-law Aaron, joined her in saying, "You're living with us, so you better work hard, you know." They started bossing me around like a servant and even had the nerve to say, "Hey, we're out of work and short on cash. We want to go out for some fun, so lend us some money, will ya?" Then they forcefully took my wallet and helped themselves to the cash inside. Could this person really be Kevin's sister? The daughter of those in-laws? She was the worst kind of person I could suspect of not even being human. It had been 3 months since sister-in-law and her husband settled in the in-laws' house. Just like that. But the sister-in-law couple, instead of looking for jobs, didn't lift a finger around the house. They showed no signs of planning to leave. Hey, what happened to my brother's inheritance? He worked at a good company, right? Must have had some savings. Isn't it strange for you to get it all? She pressured me to give up Kevin's legacy. Just then, Harry happened to pass by and he warned Pip. So fortunately, it didn't go any further. To be honest, I was at my wit's end. Living with my sister-in-law and her husband like this was more than I could bear. Around that time, Aaron started making advances towards me, suggesting an affair. Feeling a deep sense of revulsion, I took that as my cue to leave the in-laws' house. I couldn't tell the in-laws about Aaron's proposition. There was no proof. So I told them I wanted independence from my work in my son's daycare and left. I rented an apartment not too far from the in-laws' house and started a new life with my son. It was tough doing everything alone at first, but it was nothing compared to living with the sister-in-law couple. However, even after I left, they showed no intention of getting jobs. Instead, they began demanding money from the in-laws, and Pip kept contacting me, insisting on getting Kevin's inheritance. It wasn't this bad when I was there, but after I left, the sister-in-law couple would drink and create chaos if anything displeased them at the in-laws. When they were refused money, they would rampage until they got it. The stress of the situation caused the in-laws to lose weight dramatically. By the time I visited the in-laws' house after a long while, it was no longer the place I remembered. The curtains were old and shabby, and there was trash scattered around. Kevin's usually immaculate altar was dusty, and the in-laws seemed to have lost the energy even for daily chores. Worried, I started thinking about what to do, but then Harry passed away. Susan, already frail, was devastated by his death. Within days, she hardly ate anything. But who could blame her for falling apart? Even after Harry had passed away, the sister-in-law and her husband didn't shed a single tear. Instead, they persistently pressed Susan, asking, "What about Dad's inheritance? How much do we get?" Despite grieving over the recent loss of her beloved Kevin, anyone would be overwhelmed if suddenly hit with money issues, Susan included. As I noticed Susan becoming increasingly gaunt each day, my concern led me to take her to the hospital, where she was promptly admitted for malnutrition. I then hurried back to the in-laws' house, packed a bag with everything Susan had asked for, and delivered it to her at the hospital. Susan ended up being hospitalized for about 2 weeks. And during that time, not once did her daughter and her daughter's husband visit. In fact, about a week into Susan's hospital stay, when I went to get some of her clothes from the in-laws' house, I found Pip and the others merrily packing up. "Oh, Elsa, we're gonna be away for about a month, so take care of our place, will ya?" Pip said with a laugh. "Where are you going for a whole month? Susan's in the hospital." "We're off to Hawaii. Got our hands on Dad's inheritance and sold some stuff from this house, too," Pip replied, hopping around excitedly with Aaron. Pip had been eyeing the valuables in the in-laws' house for a while and seized the opportunity of Susan's hospitalization to sell them off at a pawn shop. With the money from the sales and Harry's inheritance, they planned a lavish trip to Hawaii. I urged them to visit Susan, but they didn't listen and left for Hawaii with high spirits. When I returned to the hospital and told Susan, her reaction was unexpectedly enthusiastic. I had braced myself for her anger at the unauthorized sale of her family's possessions, but Susan's eyes sparkled as she exclaimed, "The time has finally come." She was actually excited. Turns out, Susan had been considering selling the house for some time. She revealed that even when Harry was alive, there had been talks of selling the house. If this continues, the sister-in-law and her husband will end up taking over my in-laws' house. My mother-in-law, with that in mind, began to gradually pack up their belongings and consult with real estate agents. Then, when Harry passed away, Susan was convinced that she had reached her limit. Susan explained that she had thought of selling her house somehow and using that money to move into a nursing home. Upon hearing this, I contacted the real estate agent on behalf of Susan, arranged the sale, and completed the process without a hitch. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving Susan alone in a facility, so I offered, "Susan, would you like to live with us?" She was overjoyed by the suggestion and agreed to move in with my son and me after her discharge. To avoid tipping off my sister-in-law and her husband, we moved as soon as Susan was out of the hospital. Susan covered the moving expenses and apartment deposit with the money she got from selling her family home. She even managed our finances until I could find a new job. With Susan looking after my son, I was able to focus on my job search. Sometime later, my clueless sister-in-law and her husband returned from abroad. They expected to enter my in-laws' house as if nothing had changed, only to find it sold and the keys useless. They tried their keys to no avail. They bombarded us with incessant calls, but Susan and I ignored them. Later on, I heard that they contacted all the relatives trying to find Susan and my whereabouts, but we had only shared the circumstances with the relatives and kept our new address to ourselves. So, no matter how much Pip and her husband snooped around, they would never find where we were. Eventually, the couple tried to force their way into my in-laws' house by breaking a window. They were caught by a real estate agent who happened to visit and got arrested for property damage. Susan and I couldn't help but burst into laughter when we heard about it. Susan even roared with laughter, saying, "Really, how utterly shameful." I knew it was inappropriate, but I laughed along. They had treated kind-hearted Susan and Harry so terribly, after all. It served them right. The couple ended up having to pay damages. They had nearly spent all of Harry's inheritance on a trip to Hawaii, and after paying the compensation, they were left with just $5,000. Aaron in particular seemed to have no intention of working and was living off someone else. Turns out he was in debt and started facing daily harassment from debt collectors. Despite Aaron being the one in debt, it's Pip who's working herself to the bone. It's almost as if Pip's under some spell, the way she's constantly bending over backward for Aaron, working non-stop to support him and even paying off his debts. At times, Pip has reached out to relatives for financial help, but they've all turned her away after hearing the full story from Susan and me. Left with no one to borrow from, Pip's days are filled with nothing but work, from dawn till dusk. Meanwhile, Susan and I are living peaceful and happy lives every day. My son is getting better at talking and has even started kindergarten, which seems to have brought even more expression to his face. I'm so grateful to Kevin for leaving us with such a wonderful son, and to Susan, who's still here watching him grow with me. I owe so much to Kevin, to my in-laws, who have cherished me all these years. I could never forget their kindness. While Susan is still hale and hearty, I want us to travel places together, to create a multitude of memories to give back as much as I can. I'm sure Kevin and Harry would want nothing more than to see Susan, our son, and me spending our days with smiles and happiness.